She thought she was alone. That was her first mistake. The night wrapped around her like a shroud, cold and unforgiving, and the training grounds stretched endlessly in every direction, silent, empty, forgotten. At least, she believed they were. The wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth, mixing with something sharper. Blood. Her own. It leaked from the scrape on her knee where she'd fallen, where her legs had finally given out after she'd run from the gathering hall, from the eyes that watched her like she was something diseased, something contagious. An omega. Rejected. Unwanted. The words still rang in her ears, louder than the howling wind, louder than the thunder that rolled across the mountains in the distance. He'd said them in front of everyone. In front of the entire pack. The male she'd thought might see her, might choose her, had looked at her with nothing but disgust twisting his features. I reject you, he'd said, and the bond that had barely begun to form shattered like glass under a hammer. She could still feel the ghost of it, the phantom pain where something sacred had broken. Now she knelt in the dirt, hidden behind the old stone wall that bordered the training grounds, her hands pressed into the earth as if she could somehow root herself there, become part of the ground, disappear entirely. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each one burning in her chest. Tears streamed down her face, hot against her frozen skin, and she didn't bother wiping them away. What was the point? There was no one here to see her fall apart. No one here to witness the moment she finally broke. Or so she thought. She tilted her head back, staring up at the sliver of moon barely visible through the storm clouds gathering overhead. The moon goddess. The one who supposedly watched over them all, who bound mates together, who whispered destinies into the hearts of wolves. Where was she now? Where had she been when that rejection tore through her soul like claws through flesh? The words came out before she could stop them, raw and broken, spoken into the void. I don't understand. Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper, yet it felt like screaming. What did I do wrong? Why am I not enough? Why does everyone look at me like I'm nothing? The wind answered with a howl, whipping her dark hair across her face. She pushed it back with trembling fingers, her whole body shaking now, not just from the cold, but from something deeper. Something that lived in her bones, in the hollow space where her wolf should be stronger, louder, more present. But her wolf was silent. Had been silent for weeks now, ever since the whispers started. Ever since the elders began watching her with those calculating eyes, ever since she'd felt something stir inside her that didn't feel like the wolf she'd always known. Something hotter. Something that burned. I would rather be alone, she said, and this time her voice was steadier, harder. I would rather remain unmated forever than belong to a pack that breaks its own. That throws away people like they're nothing. That... Her words cut off as a wave of heat rolled through her body, sudden and violent. She gasped, pressing a hand to her chest, feeling her heart hammering beneath her ribs. What was that? It felt like fire spreading through her veins, like something waking up after a long, forced sleep. Her skin prickled with awareness, with a strange electricity that made the air around her seem to shimmer. She looked down at her hands and froze. There, on the inside of her left wrist, something was glowing. Faint, barely visible in the darkness, but unmistakable. A mark. Silver lines that hadn't been there before, forming a pattern she didn't recognize but somehow felt ancient, eternal, written in a language older than words. Her breath caught in her throat. No, she whispered. That's not possible. I don't have a mark. I've never had a... The mark pulsed, bright and fierce, and the heat intensified. She cried out softly, clutching her wrist, and the sensation wasn't pain exactly, but it was overwhelming, consuming, like her entire body was being rewritten from the inside out. The glow spread up her arm, tracing lines beneath her skin that looked like veins of starlight, of moonfire, of something that shouldn't exist in the mortal world. And then she felt it. The presence. Someone was watching her. The realization hit her like a physical blow, and her head snapped up, her eyes scanning the darkness frantically. Her wolf, silent for so long, suddenly surged to attention, hackles raised, every instinct screaming danger. But beneath the fear was something else. Something that felt like recognition. "Who's there?" Her voice came out stronger than she felt, echoing across the empty grounds. "Show yourself." The shadows moved. Not the natural shift of darkness in the wind, but something deliberate, controlled. A figure emerged from behind one of the tall training posts, stepping into the pale moonlight that had broken through the clouds. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of predatory grace that spoke of power barely contained. An alpha. Not just any alpha. She knew him. Everyone knew him. Henry, the Alpha King. The one who ruled not just their pack, but the entire Northern Territories, whose word was law, whose presence alone could make even the strongest wolves submit. He was legend made flesh, a figure more myth than man, and he was standing there, less than 20 feet away, watching her with eyes that gleamed silver in the darkness. How long had he been there? Her heart stuttered, then raced. She scrambled to her feet, her legs unsteady, her whole body still thrumming with that strange heat, that mark still glowing on her wrist. She tried to hide it instinctively, pressing her arm against her side, but she knew it was too late. He'd seen everything. The tears on her face. The broken prayers to the moon goddess. The mark appearing on her skin like some kind of divine answer to a question she hadn't even known she was asking. He'd been watching. Listening. She breathed, and she didn't know if it was an accusation or a plea. Henry didn't move closer, but his gaze held her pinned more effectively than any physical restraint. There was something in his expression she couldn't read, something intense and complicated, like he was seeing her for the first time, or maybe like he'd been seeing her all along and she was only now realizing it. "You shouldn't be here," he said, and his voice was low, rough, carrying easily across the distance between them. Not a command exactly, but not a suggestion either. Something in between. "The grounds are forbidden after dark." "Then why are you here?" The words came out before she could think better of them, sharp with challenge and pain and confusion. Something flickered in his eyes. "I asked you first." She wanted to run. Every instinct told her to shift, to flee, to put as much distance between herself and this impossibly powerful male who'd somehow witnessed her most vulnerable moment. But her legs wouldn't move. The mark on her wrist pulsed again, and she felt an invisible thread pulling tight between them, something she couldn't name but couldn't deny. "I needed to be alone," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I needed to cry where no one would see you." His words weren't mocking. They were too quiet for that, too knowing. "To ask the moon goddess why she cursed you?" Her breath caught. He had heard. Every word. The storm clouds rolled overhead, and the first drops of rain began to fall, cold and clean, washing away her tears even as new ones threatened to form. She stood there, exposed in every possible way, facing the one wolf she should fear most, and all she could think was that the moon goddess had a cruel sense of timing. Because the mark on her wrist was still glowing, burning brighter now, and she could see the exact moment Henry's gaze dropped to it, could see the recognition flash across his face, followed by something that looked almost like shock. And in that moment, standing in the rain with the Alpha King staring at the mark on her skin, she realized that her life had just changed irrevocably. The moon goddess had answered. Not with words, but with truth written in silver fire on her skin, proving something that should have been impossible. The rain fell harder now, turning the dirt beneath her feet to mud, soaking through her thin shirt until it clung to her skin like a second layer. But she barely felt the cold. All she felt was the mark burning on her wrist, pulsing in rhythm with her racing heart, and the weight of Henry's stare as he looked at it like it was something he'd been searching for his entire life. Or something he'd been dreading. She couldn't tell which. He moved then, not toward her exactly, but circling slowly, predator assessing prey, alpha evaluating a threat. Except the way his eyes kept returning to her wrist, to that silver glow that even the rain couldn't dim, told her this was something different. Something more complicated than simple dominance. How long? His voice cut through the sound of rainfall, sharp and demanding. She blinked, confusion cutting through her panic. How long what? How long have you had that mark? I don't. She looked down at her wrist, at the intricate pattern of silver lines that seemed to shift and move beneath her skin like living things. It just appeared. Right now. Just before you. She stopped, realization hitting her like a blow. You were already here. Before I even spoke. You were watching me. He didn't deny it. Didn't apologize. Just stood there in the rain, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, water running down the sharp planes of his face, and for the first time since he'd stepped from the shadows, she saw something flicker in his expression. Not guilt exactly. Something rawer than that. Conflict. I was passing through, he said finally, but the words felt carefully chosen, like he was deciding what truth to give her. I heard someone crying. I stopped. You stopped. She repeated the words, tasting them, testing them for lies. The Alpha King stopped because he heard an Omega crying in the dark. I stopped because I heard you. The correction was quiet but absolute, and something in the way he said it, you, not someone, not an Omega, but you specifically, made her chest tighten painfully. You don't even know my name. But even as she said it, she wondered if it was true. He'd been watching. For how long? And why? Kaya. Her name on his lips sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold rain. Your name is Kaya. You've been with the pack for 3 years. You work in the healing house. You have a gift for reading herbs that even the eldest healers don't understand. And 2 weeks ago, something changed. She took a step back, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. How do you know that? How do you? Because I've been watching you. No hesitation now. No careful words. Just brutal honesty delivered in that low, rough voice that seemed to resonate in her bones. For months, the world tilted. She pressed her hand against the stone wall behind her, needing something solid, something real to anchor herself to, because nothing about this moment made sense. The Alpha King didn't watch Omegas. He barely acknowledged their existence except in passing, except as parts of the pack machinery that needed to function smoothly. And he certainly didn't admit to watching specific ones for months. Why? The question came out broken, desperate. Why would you? Because I felt you. He moved closer now, just a few steps, but it was enough to make her breath catch, enough to make that mark on her wrist flare even brighter. 3 months ago, during the autumn gathering, when you stood in the circle for the blessing ceremony, something pulled at me, like a hook buried deep in my chest, yanking me toward you. I thought I was imagining it, thought it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. She could barely hear her own voice over the rain. No, his eyes held hers, silver reflecting silver, and she saw the torment there now, written plainly across his features. It wasn't nothing. But it should have been impossible. You're an Omega. She finished the sentence for him, the word tasting like ash on her tongue. Too low. Too weak. Not enough status for an Alpha King to even consider. That's not what I was going to say. There was heat in his voice now, something close to anger, but she didn't think it was directed at her. You're unmated. And he stopped, jaw clenching, and she watched the war play out across his face. I'm already bound. By duty if not by choice. The council selected my mate years ago. The political alliance, the bloodline connections, the power it would bring the territories. Everything's been arranged. Her stomach dropped. Of course. Of course, he was already promised to someone. Someone powerful, someone worthy, someone who wasn't a broken Omega kneeling in the mud and begging the moon goddess for answers. Then why are you here? She forced the words out past the lump in her throat. Why tell me any of this? Why not just walk away and pretend you never saw? Because I can't. The confession came out raw, almost violent. Because for 3 months I've tried to ignore it, tried to bury it, tried to convince myself it was nothing. And then tonight, I was walking past the gathering hall, and I heard your rejection. Heard him throw you away like you were trash. And something in me, he broke off, dragging a hand through his wet hair, looking more undone than she'd ever imagined an alpha king could look. I followed you. I shouldn't have, but I couldn't stop myself. And then I heard you praying, heard you say you'd rather be alone than belong to a pack that breaks its own, and the moon goddess answered. She finished, lifting her wrist, showing him the mark that wouldn't stop glowing. She answered by giving me this. Not just you. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, and he took another step closer. Close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from him despite the cold rain, close enough to see the conflict and hunger, and something that looked almost like fear in his eyes. Look at your mark, Kaya. Really look at it. She did, studying the silver pattern that wound around her wrist like a bracelet of moonlight. The lines formed shapes she didn't recognize, symbols that felt ancient and powerful, and her breath stopped. There, woven into the pattern, was a specific design. A crescent moon curved around a crown of stars. She'd seen that symbol before. Everyone had. It was carved into the stone of the gathering hall, painted on the banners that flew over the Alpha King's residence, marked on every official document that came from his office. It was his symbol. His bloodline mark. No, she shook her head, stepping back again, but the wall was behind her and there was nowhere to go. That's not possible. You said you were already bound. You said. I said I was bound by duty. He closed the distance between them in one smooth movement, and suddenly he was there, right there, close enough that she could see the silver flecks in his dark eyes, close enough that his scent wrapped around her, pine and rain and something wilder. Something that made her wolf finally stir from its silence. But the moon goddess doesn't care about duty. She doesn't care about political alliances or council decisions or what's convenient. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Could only watch as he gently took her wrist in his hand, his fingers warm against her cold skin, and held it up between them so they could both see the mark glowing bright and undeniable. She cares about truth, he said quietly. And the truth is this mark has been waiting. Dormant. Hidden. Waiting for me to see you by choice instead of by duty. Waiting for me to choose you instead of being forced into a bond one never wanted. Tears mixed with rain on her face. I don't understand. If this is real, then why didn't it appear before? Why wait until now, until after I was rejected, until after? Because you had to speak your truth first. His thumb brushed over the mark, and the touch sent electricity racing up her arm, through her chest, settling low in her belly like liquid fire. You had to stand in your worth. Had to say out loud that you wouldn't accept less than what you deserved. The moon goddess doesn't force bonds, Kaya. She reveals them when both wolves are ready to see. And you're ready? The question came out small, vulnerable, because she couldn't let herself hope, couldn't let herself believe that this impossible, powerful male standing in front of her was truly hers. Something shifted in his expression. The conflict was still there, the torment, but beneath it she saw something else. Something that looked like determination. I've been ready since the moment I felt that pull, he said. I just didn't know what it meant. Didn't understand why I couldn't stop thinking about you, why I found excuses to be near the healing house, why hearing your rejection tonight felt like someone drove a blade through my chest. He released her wrist, but didn't step back, and she found herself staring up at him, this male who should terrify her, who held enough power to destroy her with a word, and all she could think was that he looked as scared as she felt. What happens now? She whispered. Now. A bitter smile touched his lips. Now everything gets complicated. Because the council won't accept this. My arranged mate won't accept this. Half the pack will call you a manipulator, will say you used dark magic to create a false bond. And he stopped, jaw clenching again. I have to decide if I'm strong enough to choose what the moon goddess intended over what duty demands. And if you're not? She had to ask, had to hear him say it, even though she was terrified of the answer. He looked at her for a long moment, rain streaming down his face, silver eyes burning with an intensity that stole her breath. Then he reached up slowly, carefully, and brushed a wet strand of hair back from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Then I'm not the alpha this pack needs, he said quietly. Because an alpha who ignores the moon goddess's will, who throws away his true mate for political convenience, is no better than the male who rejected you tonight. The mark on her wrist pulsed, bright and fierce, and she felt the bond between them strengthen, solidify, become something real and tangible that she couldn't deny even if she wanted to. I'm scared, she admitted, the words barely audible over the rain. So am I. His confession was equally quiet, equally raw. But I'd rather face a scared future with my true mate than a certain one with the wrong wolf. Thunder rolled across the mountains, and the rain fell harder, and somewhere in the distance she heard voices calling, searching. The pack would find them soon. Would see them together. Would see the mark on her wrist and know that everything was about to change. Henry must have heard them too, because his hand dropped from her face and he stepped back, putting proper distance between them again. But his eyes never left hers. Go back to your quarters, he said, his voice shifting into something more commanding, more alpha. Say nothing about this. Not yet. I need to speak with the council first, need to handle this carefully, or they'll tear you apart before I can protect you. Protect me? She tested the words, and they felt foreign, impossible. No one had ever protected her before. Yes, the word was a vow. Starting now. Starting always. He turned to go, melting back into the shadows like he'd never been there at all. But his voice drifted back to her through the rain, quiet and fierce and full of promise. I see you, Kaya. All of you. And I'm not walking away. Then he was gone, and she was alone again in the rain with a glowing mark on her wrist and the impossible knowledge that the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the territories, was her mate. The moon goddess had answered her prayer. But she had a feeling the real test was just beginning. Kaya didn't go back to her quarters. She couldn't. Not yet. Not with her hands still shaking and her wrist still glowing and the ghost of Henry's touch burning on her cheek like a brand. Instead, she found herself walking, stumbling, really, through the rain-soaked forest that bordered the training grounds, putting distance between herself and the voices still calling in the darkness, between herself and the impossible reality that had just unfolded. The Alpha King was her mate. The thought kept circling through her mind, refusing to settle, refusing to feel real. She pressed her back against a massive oak tree, its ancient bark rough against her shoulders, and stared down at the mark on her wrist. The glow had dimmed slightly, no longer bright enough to illuminate the darkness around her, but it was still there. Still visible. Still undeniable. Still terrifying. Because this wasn't how her story was supposed to go. Omegas like her didn't get fairy tale endings. They got forgotten. Got overlooked. Got rejected in front of entire packs and then expected to smile and pretend their hearts hadn't just been ripped out. That was the reality she'd learned to accept over the past 3 years, ever since she'd arrived at this territory with nothing but the clothes on her back and secrets she could never speak aloud. The memories crashed over her before she could stop them. She'd been 17 when she fled her birth pack. 17 and desperate, and so afraid she'd barely been able to shift without her wolf whimpering in terror. The Silver Creek Pack. That's what they'd called themselves, though there was nothing silver about them except the chains they'd used to bind her when they realized what she was. What she could do. It had started small. A fever that wouldn't break, burning through her body for 3 days straight while the pack healers stood around her bedside, helpless and whispering. She remembered her mother's face, twisted with fear and something that looked horribly like disgust. Remembered her father refusing to enter the room at all, as if whatever curse had infected his daughter might be contagious. On the fourth day, the fever broke. And the fire came. She'd been half delirious, burning up from the inside out, when she felt something crack open in her chest. Something ancient and wild and impossibly hot. Silver flames had erupted from her hands, crawling up her arms like living things, and she'd screamed not in pain, but in shock, in terror at seeing her own skin consumed by fire that didn't burn. The flames had spread across her bedsheets, across the wooden floor, licking at the walls with hungry tongues of silver light. But nothing caught fire. Nothing burned. The flames just danced and writhed and pulsed with power that felt both foreign and intimately hers, and she'd stared at her hands in horror, watching the silver fire flicker between her fingers like it had always been there, just waiting for permission to emerge. Her mother had run from the room, screaming for the elders. Her father had finally entered, but only to grab a bucket of water and throw it at her, as if that would somehow douse flames that existed outside the natural order of things. The water hit her and evaporated instantly, steam rising in clouds around her while the silver fire continued to burn. That's when she'd known her life was over. By nightfall, the entire pack had gathered. The elders stood in a circle around her, their faces grave, their voices low as they discussed her fate like she wasn't even there. Cursed, they called her. Corrupted. An abomination against the natural order of wolves. One of them, an ancient female with milky eyes and a voice like grinding stone, had pointed a gnarled finger at her and pronounced judgment. The girl carries forbidden fire. The flames of the first wolves, the ones who defied the moon goddess and were cast down into darkness for their pride. This power should not exist. Cannot be allowed to exist. What are you saying? Her mother's voice had cracked, desperate. She's my daughter. She's dangerous. The elders' words cut through every protest. The old texts speak of wolves born with silver flame. They called them pyreborn. Said they had the power to reduce entire packs to ash, to burn through the veil between worlds, to challenge even the moon goddess herself. They were hunted down centuries ago. Destroyed. Every last one. Kaya had stood there, 17 and terrified, watching her mother's face close off, watching her father turn his back. Watching her entire pack, people she'd grown up with, played with, trusted, look at her like she was a monster. We'll have to bind her power, another elder said. Chain her. Keep her contained until we decide what to do. They'd moved toward her then, carrying silver chains blessed by ancient rituals meant to suppress wolf abilities. But the moment the first chain touched her skin, the fire had exploded outward in a wave of silver fury. Not intentionally. She hadn't meant to hurt anyone. But the power inside her had reacted to the threat, protective and wild, and suddenly there were wolves staggering back with singed fur and burned hands, and the elders were shouting orders to contain her, to stop her, to do whatever necessary. So she'd run. Shifted mid-leap and bolted into the forest with nothing but her wolf form and blind panic driving her forward. She'd heard them chasing, heard the howls echoing through the trees, but fear had made her fast. Fear and the silver fire burning in her veins, lending her speed she shouldn't have possessed. She'd run for 2 days straight, not stopping, barely breathing, until she'd crossed into neutral territory and then beyond, into lands claimed by the northern packs. By then she'd been half dead from exhaustion, her wolf form giving out, collapsing in a stream bed with her sides heaving and her vision blurring. A patrol had found her. Not from her old pack. These were northern wolves, larger and more powerful, and she'd been too weak to even try fighting when they'd surrounded her. She'd shifted back to human form, naked and shivering and covered in mud, and waited for them to either kill her or drag her back. Instead, they'd wrapped her in a cloak and brought her to their alpha. Not Henry. He'd been away at the time, dealing with some territorial dispute in the western reaches. But his second-in-command, a grizzled male named Garrick with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, had listened to her stammered explanation that she was a lone wolf seeking sanctuary, had studied her with an intensity that made her think he knew she was lying, and then simply nodded. "We don't turn away wolves in need," he'd said. "You can stay. Work in the healing house. Prove yourself useful and you'll have a place here." She'd nearly cried with relief. For 3 years, she'd kept her head down and her secrets buried. The silver fire never came back. She'd thought maybe it was gone, burned out in that desperate flight, or maybe suppressed by sheer force of will. She learned herbs and healing, discovered she had a natural gift for it that even the eldest healers respected. She found a kind of peace in the work, in helping others, in being useful. And slowly, carefully, she'd started to believe she might actually have a future. Until 2 weeks ago. She'd been gathering moon blossom in the forest, a rare flower that only grew under direct moonlight when she'd felt it. That same cracking sensation in her chest. That same heat building beneath her skin. She'd looked down at her hands in horror, watching silver sparks dance between her fingers, and the terror had come flooding back. It was waking up again. The power she'd tried so hard to bury, to forget, to pretend didn't exist. She'd managed to suppress it that night, forcing it back down through sheer panic and desperation. But it had been getting harder. Every full moon the fire pressed closer to the surface. Every time she felt strong emotion, fear, anger, even joy, she felt it stirring, restless and hungry. And then tonight, kneeling in the rain, pouring her heart out to the moon goddess, the mark had appeared. The mark that bound her to the Alpha King. The mark that proved she wasn't just some cursed Omega with forbidden power. She was his mate. Chosen by the moon goddess herself. But what would happen when he found out the truth? When he discovered that his mate wasn't just low status, but actively dangerous? That she carried power the old texts said should have been destroyed centuries ago? Would he still look at her the way he had tonight, with hunger and conflict and something that looked almost like reverence? Or would he look at her the way her birth pack had, with fear and disgust, and the cold calculation of someone deciding whether she deserved to live? Kaya wrapped her arms around herself, still shaking despite the fact that the rain had stopped and the clouds were breaking apart overhead, revealing stars scattered across the sky like silver dust. Her wolf stirred inside her, no longer silent, pressing against her consciousness with a warmth that felt almost like comfort. "Mine," her wolf whispered. "He's ours. The moon goddess showed us. Marked us. He's meant for us. But what if he can't accept what I am?" She whispered aloud to the darkness, to her wolf, to the moon goddess who'd finally answered her prayers, but might have doomed her in the process. Her wolf had no answer for that. The mark on her wrist pulsed once, soft and steady, like a heartbeat. Like a promise. And despite everything, despite her fear and her secrets and the certainty that this was all going to end in disaster, she felt something unfurl in her chest. Hope. Dangerous, foolish, impossible hope. Because Henry had looked at her like she mattered. Like she was worth fighting for. Like the moon goddess's choice meant more to him than duty or politics or what was convenient. "I see you," he'd said. "All of you." But he didn't. Not yet. Not really. The question was whether he'd still see her the same way when he learned about the silver fire burning beneath her skin. When he discovered that his mate was exactly the kind of wolf the old texts warned about. The kind that packs had hunted down and destroyed for the crime of being born with too much power. She pushed off from the tree and started walking back toward the pack grounds, her steps slow and hesitant. She needed to get to her quarters before someone found her out here, needed to hide the mark and figure out what came next. But with every step, she felt the weight of her secrets pressing down harder. The Alpha King was her mate, and she was Pyreborn. Two truths that couldn't coexist. Unless he was strong enough to choose her anyway. Unless the moon goddess knew something she didn't. Unless this impossible, terrifying bond was meant to be exactly what saved her instead of what destroyed her. She touched the mark on her wrist one more time, feeling its warmth pulse against her fingertips. And she prayed, really prayed, that when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't burn them both to ash. 3 days passed like holding her breath underwater. Kaya moved through the healing house in a fog, grinding herbs and mixing tinctures, and tending to minor injuries with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. She wrapped cloth bandages around the mark on her wrist, told anyone who asked that she'd burned herself on a hot kettle, and tried not to flinch every time someone looked at her too long. The lies tasted like ash on her tongue. She hadn't seen Henry since that night in the rain. Hadn't heard from him. Hadn't received any message or sign that he was thinking about her at all. Part of her wondered if she'd imagined the whole thing, the mark appearing, his confession, the way he'd touched her face like she was something precious instead of something broken. But the mark was still there, hidden beneath layers of cloth, pulsing steadily against her skin like a second heartbeat, reminding her that it had been real, that he was real, that somewhere in this massive territory, the Alpha King was figuring out how to tell his council that the moon goddess had other plans for him. Or maybe he was figuring out how to reject her without causing a scandal. That thought made her chest ache so badly she had to stop what she was doing and press her hand against her sternum, trying to breathe through the pain. "You all right, girl?" Kaya looked up to find Leora watching her from across the workroom. The head healer was ancient, no one knew exactly how old, with silver hair that fell to her waist and eyes that saw far too much. She'd been kind to Kaya over the years, patient with her questions, impressed by her natural gift with herbs. But there was something in her gaze now that made Kaya's wolf stir uneasily. "I'm fine," Kaya lied, turning back to the mortar and pestle in front of her, grinding dried lavender into powder with more force than necessary. "Just tired." "Tired." Leora repeated the word like she was tasting it for truth. "Or haunted." Kaya's hands stilled. "What?" The old healer moved closer, her steps slow but purposeful, and Kaya fought the urge to back away. Leora had never been threatening before, but something about the way she was looking at Kaya now, intent, searching, almost hungry, made her wolf's hackles rise. "I've been watching you," Leora said quietly. "These past 2 weeks especially. You've been different. Distracted. And there's something about your scent that's changed. Like smoke and starlight. Like something old is waking up inside you." Kaya's heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" Leora reached out, and before Kaya could stop her, the old healer's fingers wrapped around her wrist. Around the cloth bandage hiding the mark. "Show me." "No, Show me, child." The command carried weight, alpha authority borrowed from years of serving the pack, and Kaya found her hands moving without permission, unwrapping the cloth with shaking fingers. The mark blazed to life the moment the bandage fell away. Silver lines glowing bright against her skin, the crescent moon and crown of stars unmistakable even in the afternoon light streaming through the healing house windows. Leora's breath caught. Her grip on Kaya's wrist tightened almost painfully, and for a long moment she just stared, her expression cycling through shock, recognition, and something that looked disturbingly like awe. "By the moon goddess," she whispered. "It's real. After all these years, it's finally real." "What's real?" Kaya tried to pull her hand back, but Leora's grip was iron. "Please, you're hurting me." The old healer released her immediately, stepping back with both hands raised. But her eyes never left the mark, and there was something fierce burning in her gaze now. Something that looked like vindication. "Come with me," Leora said, already moving toward the back of the healing house, toward the private rooms where they stored rare ingredients and ancient texts. "Now, Kaya." Before anyone else sees. Every instinct told Kaya to run. But something in Leora's voice, urgency mixed with something that almost sounded like hope, made her follow. They slipped into the back room, and Leora shut the door behind them, sliding a heavy wooden bar across it to lock them in. The room was small and cluttered, shelves lining every wall, filled with jars of dried herbs and bottles of tinctures and leather-bound books so old their spines were cracked and faded. Leora moved to the far corner, reaching behind a stack of supplies to pull out a wooden box Kaya had never seen before. "What is that?" Kaya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The truth." Leora set the box on the workbench with reverent care, her hands trembling slightly as she opened it. Inside were more books, smaller, older, their pages yellowed with age, and what looked like a piece of parchment sealed with wax. The truth your birth pack should have told you. The truth that would have saved you years of hiding. Kaya's breath caught. "You know about where you came from, what you are." Leora's smile was sad but knowing. "I've known since the day you arrived, child. You think I couldn't smell the silver fire buried beneath your skin? Couldn't see the way your wolf burned hotter than normal, the way herbs responded to your touch like you carried moonlight in your fingertips? Then why didn't you say anything?" The question came out broken, desperate. "Why let me think I had to hide?" "Because you weren't ready." Leora pulled one of the ancient books from the box, handling it like something sacred. "And because the Alpha King wasn't here." But now, she looked up, her eyes bright. "Now everything has changed." The mark appeared. The bond revealed itself. And the prophecy can finally unfold the way it was always meant to. "Prophecy?" Kaya shook her head, backing up a step. "What prophecy? I don't understand." Leora opened the book, its pages crackling with age, and turned it so Kaya could see. The text was written in an ancient script, the words flowing and elaborate, but there were illustrations too. Images of wolves wreathed in silver flame. A female figure standing before an altar with her hands raised, fire pouring from her palms. And beneath it all, a symbol that made Kaya's blood run cold. The same symbol that was glowing on her wrist right now. "The prophecy of the Pyreborn mate," Leora read aloud, her voice taking on the cadence of ritual, of something memorized long ago. "When the moon bleeds silver and the strongest alpha walks alone, the one born of forbidden flame shall rise. She who carries the fire of the first wolves, she who was cast out and marked for death, shall be bound to the king by the moon goddess's own hand. Together they will either unite the territories in unprecedented peace, or burn them all to ash. The choice lies in whether he chooses duty or destiny, fear or faith, the safety of what is known or the terror of what could be." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and impossible and terrifying in their certainty. "That's not about me," Kaya said, but her voice shook with the lie. "That can't be about me. I'm just a cursed Omega?" Leora's laugh was sharp. "Oh, child. You were never cursed. You were chosen. The Pyreborn aren't abominations against the moon goddess. They're her gifts, her warriors. Created to stand beside the strongest alphas in times when the territories need power that goes beyond natural law." My birth pack said. Your birth pack was ignorant. Fearful. They saw power they couldn't control and called it evil instead of admitting they were too weak to understand it. Leora moved closer, taking Kaya's marked wrist gently this time. "But Henry isn't weak. And the moon goddess doesn't make mistakes. She bound you to him because you're exactly what he needs. What the territories need." "For what?" Kaya's voice cracked. "What could possibly require?" She stopped as Leora turned to another page, revealing a map. But not a normal map. This one showed the territories marked with symbols, some glowing gold, some dark crimson, and right at the center, where the northern territories met the borders of 3 other regions, a black mark that looked like corruption spreading. "The veil is thinning," Leora said quietly. "Have you felt it? The way the air tastes wrong sometimes? The way shadows move when they shouldn't? The increase in rogue attacks, in wolves losing their minds to bloodlust for no reason." Kaya had noticed. Everyone had. But the elders kept saying it was just a bad season, that things would settle. It's not settling, Leora continued, as if reading her thoughts. It's getting worse. Something is pushing through from the dark lands beyond the veil. Something that wants to tear down the barrier between our world and the realm where the corrupted first wolves were banished. And when it breaks through, when the barrier finally shatters, we're going to need more than normal wolf strength to survive. We're going to need silver fire, Kaya whispered, understanding finally crystallizing like ice in her veins. Yes. Leora squeezed her wrist gently. We're going to need you. Standing beside the Alpha King, united by the moon goddess's bond. The two of you together are the only thing that can burn back the darkness and repair the veil before it's too late. Kaya stared at the map, at the black corruption spreading across the page, and felt something shift inside her. The silver fire that had always felt like a curse, like a burden she needed to suppress, suddenly didn't feel quite so wrong. It felt like purpose. Like destiny she'd been running from her entire life finally catching up. He doesn't know yet, she said. About the fire. About what I am. Then you'll have to tell him. Leora closed the book carefully. Because time is running out, Kaya. The next full moon is in 4 days. That's when the corruption will be at its strongest. When whatever is trying to break through will make its move. And you need to be ready. United. Accepted as his mate by the pack and the council, or the strength of your combined bond won't be enough. 4 days. She had 4 days to somehow convince the Alpha King and an entire pack that a cursed Omega with forbidden fire was exactly who they needed to survive. 4 days to accept that she wasn't just Kaya the healer anymore. She was the Pyreborn. The one from the prophecy. The mate chosen by the moon goddess to stand beside the strongest alpha and either save the territories or watch them burn. I can't do this, she breathed. I'm not strong enough. I'm not. You are. Leora's voice was absolute. The moon goddess doesn't choose the already strong child. She chooses those with the strength to become what's needed. And she chose you. The mark on Kaya's wrist pulsed, warm and steady, and she felt something flow through the bond. Not words exactly, but a feeling. A presence. Henry, somewhere else in the territory, and suddenly she knew with absolute certainty that he felt her fear. Her doubt. Her terror at what was coming. And he was calling her to him. He wants to see me, she whispered, pressing her hand over her racing heart. I can feel it. Through the bond. Then go. Leora moved to unlock the door. Go to him. Tell him everything. Trust that the moon goddess knew what she was doing when she bound you together. Kaya nodded, her legs shaky as she moved toward the door. But she paused at the threshold, looking back at the ancient healer who'd kept her secrets for 3 years. Why did you wait? She asked. Why not tell me this sooner? Leora's smile was sad and knowing. Because some truths can only be accepted when you're ready to hear them. 3 years ago, you were just a frightened girl running from a power you didn't understand. But now, her eyes dropped to the glowing mark. Now you're the Alpha King's mate. And that changes everything. Kaya left the healing house with the prophecy echoing in her mind and silver fire stirring beneath her skin. The afternoon sun was warm on her face, but she barely felt it. All she felt was the pull of the bond, leading her through the territory toward wherever Henry waited. Toward the truth she could no longer hide. Toward a destiny she never asked for but could no longer deny. The Pyreborn was awakening. And the territories would never be the same. The bond led her to the sacred grove. Kaya had heard of it, but never seen it, a place where only alphas and those of high rank were permitted to enter. Ancient oak trees formed a natural cathedral, their branches weaving together overhead to create a canopy so thick that even midday sun filtered through in shafts of dusty gold light. At the center stood an altar carved from a single piece of black stone, its surface etched with symbols that predated written language. And standing before that altar, his back to her, was Henry. She stopped at the edge of the grove, suddenly uncertain. He hadn't turned around, but she knew he felt her presence the same way she'd felt his call. The bond hummed between them, alive and electric, stronger than it had been 3 days ago. "You came," he said quietly, still not turning. "I wasn't sure you would. I felt you calling." She took a tentative step forward, her feet silent on the moss-covered ground. "Through the bond. I didn't know that was possible." "Neither did I." He finally turned, and the sight of him stole her breath. He looked different than he had that night in the rain. More controlled. More alpha. But there was something in his eyes, something raw and conflicted, that told her the past 3 days had been just as hard for him. There's a lot about true mate bonds that isn't common knowledge. Most wolves never experience them. Most settle for chosen mates, political alliances, bonds that are functional but not fated. But ours is fated. She said it like a statement, but it came out like a question. "Yes." He moved closer, each step deliberate, predatory, and she felt her wolf respond with a surge of recognition and want that made her knees weak. "I've spent 3 days researching, reading every ancient text in the Alpha's archives, consulting with a few elders who still remember the old ways. And they all say the same thing. A mark that appears spontaneously, glowing silver, bearing the Alpha's bloodline symbol that only happens with true mates. With bonds created by the moon goddess herself." He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the silver flecks in his dark eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his hands were clenched at his sides like he was fighting the urge to reach for her. "I told the council," he said, and the words landed like stones. Kaya's heart stuttered. "What did they say?" His bitter laugh echoed through the grove. "What do you think they said?" "That it's impossible. That an Omega can't be the true mate of an Alpha King. That you must have used dark magic to create a false bond. That I'm being manipulated, deceived, led astray by lust or enchantment or," he broke off, dragging a hand through his hair. "They want to test you. To have their scholars and healers examine the mark, interrogate you, determine if it's real or fabricated." Fear spiked through her. "And if they decide it's real? Then they'll find another reason to reject you." His voice was hard now, edged with fury barely contained. "You're Omega. You're not from a powerful bloodline. You have no political connections, no family alliances to offer. You're exactly the kind of mate they spent years ensuring I would never choose. Because you were supposed to choose her." Kaya didn't have to ask who. Everyone knew about the arranged mate. The daughter of the Eastern Alpha, a female of impeccable lineage and staggering political value. "When is the bonding ceremony supposed to happen?" "Tomorrow night." The confession was quiet, devastating. "During the full moon." "Everything's been arranged for months. The entire Eastern Pack is already traveling here for the ceremony. Alphas from 3 other territories are coming to witness it. It's not just a mating. It's a political treaty, an alliance that will shift the power balance across all the territories. And I'm ruining it." The words tasted like poison. "No," he closed the distance between them in 2 swift strides, his hands coming up to cup her face, forcing her to look at him. "The moon goddess is ruining it. Or fixing it. Or revealing what should have been all along. I don't know which. But I know this." His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, and the touch sent heat racing through her veins. "I know that feeling you through this bond is the most real thing I've ever experienced. I know that 3 days without seeing you felt like torture. I know that the thought of standing at that altar tomorrow night and binding myself to someone else makes me want to burn the whole ceremony to the ground." Hope and fear warred in her chest. "But you can't just walk away from it. The political consequences will be catastrophic," he finished. "The Eastern Alpha will take it as an insult. The alliance will fall apart. Other territories will see it as weakness, as the Northern Alpha being controlled by base desire instead of strategic thinking. Some will call for my removal as Alpha King. Others will use it as an excuse to start conflicts they've been waiting for. Then you have to go through with it." The words broke something inside her, but she forced them out anyway. "You have to choose duty. Choose your pack. Choose. Don't." His voice was sharp, almost desperate. Don't tell me to choose duty over you. Don't make yourself small because the world says you should be. I'm not making myself small. I'm being realistic. She pulled back from his touch, wrapping her arms around herself. You're the Alpha King. You have responsibilities that go beyond what you want. Beyond what we want. And her voice cracked. I'm just an Omega with no value to offer except apparently a bond that's going to destroy everything you've built. You're not just anything. He moved toward her again, relentless. You're my mate. Chosen by the moon goddess. And you have more value than any political alliance could ever. I'm Pyreborn. The words exploded out of her before she could stop them, sharp and terrible in the sacred silence of the grove. Henry froze, his expression shifting from determination to confusion. What? I'm Pyreborn. She said it again, and this time her voice was steadier, even as her heart threatened to hammer out of her chest. I carry silver fire. The forbidden flames that the first wolves wielded before they were cast down. That's why my birth pack exiled me. That's why I've been hiding for 3 years. That's why. She held up her wrist, showing him the mark that was glowing brighter now, pulsing with urgency. That's why the moon goddess bound me to you. Because there's a prophecy, and apparently we're part of it, and in 4 days something is going to try to break through the veil, and we're supposed to stop it together, but I can't even control this power and... She was spiraling, the words tumbling out faster and faster, but Henry caught her shoulders, grounding her. Breathe, he commanded, his alpha voice cutting through her panic. Kaya, breathe. She sucked in air, her chest heaving, and stared up at him, waiting for the fear to appear in his eyes. Waiting for him to back away, to realize what he'd bound himself to understand that his mate wasn't just politically inconvenient, but actively dangerous. Instead, he looked at her like she'd just confirmed something he'd suspected all along. Show me, he said quietly. What? The silver fire. Show me. I can't. I haven't been able to summon it in 3 years. Not since I ran. I've kept it buried because I'm terrified of what happens if. Show me anyway. His hands slid down her arms, his fingers threading through hers. Trust the bond. Trust me. Let it out. Henry, if I lose control. You won't. His certainty was absolute. Because I'm here. And whatever you are, whatever power you carry, the moon goddess gave it to you for a reason. She bound you to me for a reason. So show me. Kaya closed her eyes, trembling, and reached for the thing she'd spent years suppressing. The heat buried beneath her skin. The silver fire that whispered promises of destruction and power in equal measure. She'd always forced it down before, strangled it, suffocated it until it went dormant again. This time, she let it rise. Heat flooded her veins, molten and fierce. She gasped as silver flames erupted from her hands, crawling up her arms in ribbons of light that didn't burn. The fire danced and writhed, casting strange shadows across the grove, and she heard Henry's sharp intake of breath. But he didn't let go of her hands. The flames spread to where their skin touched, flowing over his fingers, and she waited for him to cry out, to pull away. Instead, he laughed, a sound of pure wonder. It doesn't burn, he said, staring at the silver fire consuming both their joined hands. It's warm. Like sunlight. Like moonlight made solid, she whispered. That's what the old text said. The first wolves could wield fire that came from the moon itself, not from earthly flame. It was meant to protect, not destroy. But they corrupted it, used it for conquest and pride, and the moon goddess took it away. Until now. He looked up from their burning hands to her face. Until you. The Pyreborn. The one who carries it pure. You're not afraid. She couldn't keep the wonder out of her voice. I'm terrified, he admitted. But not of you. Of what it means. Of the responsibility. Of the fight that's coming. His grip on her hands tightened. But I'm not afraid of your power, Kaya. I'm in awe of it. The moment shattered as voices erupted from beyond the grove. Angry voices. Multiple wolves. Moving fast. Henry's head snapped toward the sound, his whole body going rigid. They followed you. Who? The council. They must have sent trackers to watch you. He released her hands reluctantly, and the silver fire dimmed but didn't disappear entirely. We need to. But it was too late. Wolves burst into the sacred grove, not just trackers, but council members, high-ranking pack officials, and at the center of them all, a female Kaya had never seen before but recognized instantly. She was beautiful. Devastatingly so. Tall and regal with honey-colored hair and amber eyes that burned with intelligence and fury. She wore the formal robes of an Eastern pack royal, and the way she moved spoke of power, grace, and absolute confidence in her right to be here. Talia. The arranged mate. So it's true. Talia's voice was cold, controlled, but Kaya could hear the rage beneath it. The Alpha King has been meeting secretly with an Omega, betraying his vows before they're even spoken. I've made no vows to you, Henry said, stepping in front of Kaya instinctively, protectively. The ceremony hasn't happened. I'm still free to. To what? One of the council members, an elderly male with silver-streaked hair, stepped forward, his face twisted with disgust. To throw away a political alliance that took years to negotiate? To insult the Eastern Alpha and his entire pack? To jeopardize the peace of the territories because you couldn't control your base urges? This isn't about base urges. Henry's voice carried the weight of alpha command. This is about a true mate bond, marked by the moon goddess herself. Look at her wrist if you don't believe me. All eyes turned to Kaya. She stood frozen, the silver fire still flickering faintly around her hands, making her position even more damning. Several of the wolves took a step back, fear flashing across their faces. Witchcraft, someone hissed. She's using dark magic to seduce him. That's silver fire, another voice said, awed and horrified. She's Pyreborn. She's one of the cursed. She's my mate. Henry's roar silenced everyone, the force of his alpha power rippling through the grove like a shockwave. Chosen by the moon goddess. Marked with my bloodline symbol. And I will not stand here and let you condemn her for gifts she was born with. Talia laughed, the sound sharp and cutting. Gifts? Is that what we're calling forbidden power now? Alpha Henry, you've been deceived. This Omega has clearly used some form of enchantment to make you believe. I believe what the moon goddess has shown me. He turned slightly, reaching back for Kaya's hand. And I choose. Then you choose to be removed as Alpha King. The words came from the back of the group, from a figure Kaya hadn't noticed before. He stepped forward now, an ancient wolf with scars crossing his face and eyes that held centuries of cunning. Corvin, the head of the council. The one whose approval could make or break an alpha's reign. The council has the authority, Corvin continued, his voice raspy but powerful, to remove an alpha who acts against the interests of the pack. An alpha who chooses personal desire over political necessity. An alpha who would bring a cursed wolf into our territory and call it the moon goddess's will. You wouldn't dare, Henry growled. We would. We will. Corvin's smile was cold. Unless you do what's right. What's necessary. Send this Omega away. Go through with the ceremony tomorrow as planned. Bind yourself to Talia and secure the alliance. Or face a vote of no confidence from the entire council. The silence that followed was suffocating. Kaya felt Henry's hand tighten on hers, felt the war raging inside him through the bond. Duty or destiny? The pack's safety or the moon goddess's will? Everything he'd built or everything he'd been fated for. She made the choice for him. I'll go. She pulled her hand free, ignoring how her heart shattered at the loss of contact. I'll leave the territory. Tonight. You won't see me again. Kaya, no. It's the only way. She forced herself to look at him, to memorize his face, because she knew this was the last time. You have to choose your pack. I understand. I won't let you lose everything because of me. You are everything. His voice broke on the words. No, she stepped back, the silver fire finally dying, leaving her hands cold and empty. I'm just an Omega who was foolish enough to believe in fairy tales. She turned and ran before anyone could stop her, before she could see the devastation on Henry's face, before the tears streaming down her cheeks could give away just how completely her heart was breaking. Behind her, she heard Talia's satisfied voice. A wise choice. For both of you. And Corvin's response, lock down the territory. I want trackers on her trail. Make sure she actually leaves and doesn't try to return for tomorrow's ceremony. We can't have any disruptions. Kaya ran faster, her wolf howling in grief inside her chest. She'd walked away from her true mate. From the bond the moon goddess created. From the prophecy that said they were supposed to face the darkness together. And in 4 days, when the corruption broke through the veil, she would face it alone. Or the territories would burn. She didn't leave. She knew she should. Knew that every moment she stayed in the territory was a risk, that the trackers were probably already following her scent, that the smart thing, the safe thing, would be to run as far and as fast as she could. But something stopped her. Not just the bond, though it pulled at her chest like a physical tether, aching with the distance she'd put between herself and Henry. Not just the prophecy, though Leora's words echoed in her mind with increasing urgency. It was something deeper. Something that whispered she wasn't meant to run anymore. That running had never solved anything, had only prolonged the inevitable. So instead of fleeing the territory, she found herself heading deeper into it. To the place Leora had described from the ancient texts. The place where the veil was thinnest, where the barrier between worlds grew fragile enough that those with the right kind of sight could see the cracks forming. The Moonfall Caves. They sat at the northernmost edge of the territory, carved into the mountainside by forces older than memory. Most wolves avoided them instinctively, sensing the wrongness that clung to the air around the entrance. But Kaya felt drawn to them now, pulled by the same instinct that had made the silver fire rise earlier. She needed to understand what was coming. Needed to see the threat with her own eyes. The cave mouth yawned before her like the throat of some great beast, darkness spilling out into the evening air. She hesitated at the threshold, her wolf whining nervously, but then the mark on her wrist pulsed, warm, insistent, and she stepped inside. The temperature dropped immediately. Not the normal coolness of underground spaces, but something colder. Something wrong. Her breath misted in front of her face as she moved deeper, one hand trailing along the rough stone wall to guide her through the darkness. Then she saw it. Light. But not natural light. This glowed with a sickly purple hue, pulsing like a heartbeat, emanating from deep within the cave system. She followed it, her steps careful, her every sense on high alert. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern, and Kaya stopped dead, her breath catching in her throat. The veil. It hung in the air like a curtain made of starlight and shadow, shimmering and translucent, stretching from floor to ceiling. But it wasn't whole anymore. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, dark veins spreading like infection through crystal. And through those cracks, she could see movement. Shadows that writhed and twisted with malevolent intelligence, pressing against the barrier, testing its strength. Waiting for it to break. Beautiful, isn't it? Kaya spun, her heart leaping into her throat, silver fire instinctively springing to her hands. Henry stood at the tunnel entrance, his eyes reflecting the purple glow of the corrupted veil. He looked different than he had in the grove. Wilder. Less controlled. His formal alpha clothing was gone, replaced by simple dark pants and a shirt, his feet bare on the cold stone. How did you find me? Her voice echoed in the vast space. I didn't. He moved closer, his steps slow and deliberate. The bond did. The moment you stopped running, I felt the shift. Felt you anchoring yourself somewhere with purpose instead of fleeing in panic. And I knew. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze intense. I knew you'd come here. To see what we're supposed to fight. You shouldn't be here. She didn't lower her hands, didn't extinguish the silver fire. The ceremony is tomorrow. You should be preparing. You should be. I told them no. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and terrifying and wonderful. What? I told the council no. He said it again, and this time she heard the exhaustion beneath the words, the weight of the decision. I told them I wouldn't go through with the ceremony. That I couldn't bind myself to Talia when the moon goddess had already bound me to you. That if they wanted to remove me as Alpha King, then so be it, but I wouldn't betray my true mate. Kaya's legs felt weak. Henry, the consequences will be handled. He closed the remaining distance between them, and the silver fire around her hands flared brighter in response to his proximity. The Eastern Alpha is furious. Talia's family is calling for reparations. Half the council is demanding my removal. But the other half, a bitter smile touched his lips. The other half remembered the old laws. The ones that say a true mate bond, marked by the moon goddess herself, supersedes all political arrangements. That an alpha who rejects such a bond forfeits his right to lead. So you're trapped either way. Understanding crashed over her. Reject me and lose your position for defying the moon goddess. Accept me and lose it for defying the council. Unless. He reached out slowly, his fingers hovering just above her flaming hands. Unless we prove that the bond is real. That you're not just my mate, but the mate the territories need. The one the prophecy spoke of. The Pyreborn who can stand against what's coming through that veil. She looked past him at the corrupted barrier, at the shadows pressing hungrily against the cracks. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You are. His certainty was absolute. I've seen your fire, Kaya. I've felt your strength through the bond. You're more powerful than you know. You just have to stop being afraid of it. Easy for you to say. A broken laugh escaped her. You weren't hunted by your own pack for it. Weren't told your entire life that you were cursed, corrupted, an abomination that should have been destroyed. No, his voice gentled. But I was told my entire life that my worth was measured in political value. That my purpose was to secure alliances, expand territory, maintain power. That love was a luxury an Alpha King couldn't afford. That mates were chosen for bloodlines and connections, not because the moon goddess said they belonged together. He moved his hand, not to touch her flaming fingers, but to press his palm against her cheek. The silver fire danced around his wrist, harmless and warm, and she felt the truth of his words through the bond. I've been trapped in duty just as much as you've been trapped in fear, he continued quietly. And I'm choosing to break free. I'm choosing you. Choosing to trust that the moon goddess knew what she was doing when she bound us. But I need you to choose too. Not to run. Not to make yourself small. But to stand with me and face whatever's coming. Tears burned in her eyes. What if I fail? What if the power isn't enough, or I can't control it, or... Then we fail together. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. But I'd rather fail fighting beside my true mate than succeed while betraying her. Wouldn't you? The question hung in the charged air between them. Behind them, the veil pulsed, the shadows pressing harder against the cracks. Time was running out. The choice was simple and terrible and unavoidable. Run and stay safe but alone. Or stand and risk everything with him. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'd rather fight beside you. Something fierce and triumphant flashed in his eyes. Then show me. Show me what you can really do when you stop holding back. Here? Now. The veil responds to power. He gestured to the corrupted barrier. Especially power like yours. If you can make it react, if the silver fire can touch it, then we'll know you're strong enough to face what's coming. And the council will have their proof that you're not just my mate, you're the territory's salvation. Fear spiked through her. And if I make it worse? If my power feeds the corruption instead of fighting it? It won't. His hand slid from her cheek to her marked wrist, his fingers wrapping around the glowing symbol. Because this bond wasn't created to destroy. It was created to protect. So trust it. Trust yourself. Trust me. The mark flared at his touch, blindingly bright, and Kaya felt the bond surge between them like a living thing. His strength flowing into her. His certainty. His absolute faith that she was exactly what she needed to be. She closed her eyes and reached deep. Not gently this time. Not tentatively. She grabbed for the silver fire with both hands, metaphorically speaking, and yanked it to the surface with everything she had. Heat exploded through her body, molten and fierce, and when she opened her eyes, the flames were everywhere. Covering her arms, her shoulders, spreading across her chest like armor made of moonlight. Henry's sharp intake of breath told her it was more than he'd expected, but his grip on her wrist never faltered. "Now the veil," he said, his voice rough with awe. "Show it what you are." Kaya turned toward the corrupted barrier, toward the shadows pressing hungrily against the cracks, and raised her free hand. The silver fire gathered there, condensing, intensifying, until her palm held a sphere of pure white flame that hurt to look at directly. She threw it. The sphere hit the veil like a comet striking water, and the entire cavern erupted with light. The silver fire spread across the barrier's surface, racing along the cracks, filling them with moonlight instead of corruption. The shadows on the other side recoiled, shrieking. She could hear them even through the dimensional barrier, high-pitched and agonized. The purple glow began to fade. The cracks began to seal. And for one perfect moment, the veil looked whole again, pristine and strong, held together by threads of silver flame that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Then the flames dimmed, and the cracks returned. Not as bad as before, but still there. Still spreading. Kaya staggered, suddenly exhausted, and Henry caught her before she could fall. "I couldn't hold it," she gasped against his chest. "I wasn't strong enough to." "You were amazing." His arms tightened around her, and she felt pride flowing through the bond, fierce and absolute. "You just repaired the veil. Temporarily, yes, but you proved it can be done. That your power can fight the corruption. But not permanently. Not alone." No, he pulled back just enough to look at her, and there was something new in his expression now. Something that looked like hope. Not alone. But the prophecy never said you'd fight alone. It said we'd fight together. United by the moon goddess's bond. And we just proved that works. How? He held up his hand, and she saw it. Faint traces of silver fire still clinging to his skin where he'd held her wrist. Where the bond connected them physically. The fire responded to him now, recognizing him as its other half, the strength to her power, the anchor to her flame. "The bond amplifies both of us," he said quietly. "Your power flows stronger when I'm touching you. And my strength multiplies when I'm channeling your fire. Together, we're more than the sum of our parts. Together, we might actually be able to stop what's coming." She finished the thought, understanding finally crystallizing. That's why the moon goddess found us. Not just because we're mates, but because we're the only chance the territories have. Yes. He cupped her face in both hands, silver fire still dancing faintly around his fingers. "So I need you to stop trying to protect me by leaving. Stop trying to make yourself small because the world says you should be. I need you to stand beside me, as my mate, as my equal, as the Pyreborn who's going to save us all, and let me stand beside you." "The council will never accept it," she whispered, even as her heart soared at the words. "Then we'll make them." His smile was sharp, feral, all alpha. "We have 4 days until the next full moon. 4 days to prepare. 4 days to train you to control the fire, to strengthen the bond, to become what we need to be. And then, when whatever's trying to break through makes its move, we'll show them exactly why the moon goddess chose us. And if we fail, we won't." He leaned in, his lips barely brushing hers, and the silver fire flared between them like a benediction. "Because I've finally found something worth fighting for beyond duty. worth risking everything for. And I'm not letting you go. Not for the council. Not for political alliances. Not for anything. Kaya closed the remaining distance and kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate and fierce and full of 3 years of hiding, 3 days of separation, and the terrible certainty that they might not survive what was coming. The silver fire erupted around them both, harmless and warm, wrapping them in light as the kiss deepened. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she saw the truth written plainly on his face. He loved her. Maybe he didn't have the words yet. Maybe it was too soon, too fast, too impossible. But she felt it through the bond, warm and certain and absolutely real. And she loved him too. The Alpha King and the Pyreborn. The strongest wolf and the cursed Omega. 2 halves of an impossible whole, bound by the moon goddess and destined to either save the territories or watch them burn. Teach me, she said, her voice steady for the first time since this all began. Teach me how to control the fire, how to strengthen the bond, how to become what we need to be. His smile was brilliant, triumphant. Starting now. Starting here. We have 4 days, Kaya. Let's make them count. Behind them, the veil pulsed, still cracked but no longer spreading. The shadows beyond it watched and waited, patient and hungry. But they were no longer watching just an Omega alone in the dark. They were watching the Alpha King and his true mate. United. Determined. Ready to fight. And that changed everything. 3 days passed in a blur of fire and moonlight and stolen moments. Henry kept his word. He brought her to hidden places within the territory, abandoned training grounds, forgotten clearings, the deepest parts of the forest where no one would witness what they were doing. And there, under stars and sun alike, he taught her to stop fearing the silver fire and start wielding it. Not as a curse. As a weapon. The training was brutal. He pushed her past exhaustion, past the point where her body screamed for rest and her wolf whimpered with fatigue. He made her summon the flames again and again until they came without effort, without thought, as natural as breathing. Made her learn to shape them, control them, direct them with precision instead of just letting them explode outward in wild bursts. And, through it all, the bond grew stronger. She learned that when he touched her, his hand on her wrist, his fingers threaded through hers, his body pressed against hers, the fire burned hotter, cleaner, more powerful. That his alpha strength flowed through the bond and amplified everything she was. That together they created something that neither of them could achieve alone. But she also learned what it cost him. Each moment he spent with her was a moment away from the council, away from managing the political disaster his rejection of Talia had created. The Eastern Pack had left in fury, taking their alliance offers with them. Other territories were watching, waiting, circling like wolves scenting blood in the water. And half his own council was actively plotting to remove him from power. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. Heard the tension in his voice when messengers found them during training sessions, delivering news of yet another challenge to his authority, another faction threatening to break away, another problem that needed his attention. But he never left her side for long. The territories can wait, he'd said when she tried to send him back to handle the crisis. You're more important. This is more important. If we're not ready when the full moon rises tomorrow night, none of the political maneuvering will matter because we'll all be dead. Tomorrow night. The thought made her stomach clench with fear and anticipation in equal measure. The full moon. When the veil would be at its weakest. When whatever was pressing against those cracks would finally break through. When she and Henry would either prove they were strong enough to stop it, or watch the territories fall to corruption and darkness. Now, on the afternoon before the full moon, Kaya stood in the center of an abandoned stone circle deep in the forest, sweat dripping down her spine, silver fire dancing around her clenched fists. Henry circled her slowly, his eyes tracking every flicker of flame, every shift in her stance. Again, he commanded. But this time, don't just summon it. Shape it. Give it form. Make it into something useful. She closed her eyes, reaching for the fire that lived beneath her skin. It came easily now, eager, responsive. She pulled it to the surface and then, carefully, deliberately began to mold it. The flames condensed, hardening, taking shape in her hands until she held twin blades made of solid moonfire. Henry's sharp intake of breath told her she'd succeeded. Good. He moved closer, examining the weapons with barely contained awe. Very good. Now hold them steady. Don't let the form waver. She gritted her teeth, concentrating, feeling the fire want to return to its natural state, wild and formless, but forcing it to stay solid, stay shaped, stay useful. The blades held for 10 seconds. 20. 30. Then her concentration broke, and they dissolved back into flickering flames around her hands. I can't hold it longer than that, she gasped, frustration coloring her voice. Every time I get close, it just slips away. I know. He caught her hands, and the touch sent that familiar surge of strength through the bond. But that's because you're still fighting alone. Here, try again. But this time, lean into the bond. Let me help you hold it. She summoned the blades again, feeling them take shape, and this time when they started to waver, she didn't try to stabilize them alone. Instead, she opened herself to the bond, letting Henry's strength flow through their connection, using it to anchor the flames. The blades solidified instantly, became more real, more permanent, glowing with combined power that made the air around them shimmer with heat. There. Henry's voice was rough with satisfaction. That's what we need tomorrow night. Not you fighting alone. Not me standing helpless. But both of us together, your power and my strength, creating something neither of us could achieve separately. Kaya stared at the weapons in her hands, feeling their weight, their solidity, and for the first time since this all began, she felt something close to confidence. Maybe they actually could do this. Maybe the prophecy wasn't just beautiful words destined to end in tragedy. Maybe, Alpha Henry. The shout shattered the moment. Both of them spun toward the sound as a young wolf burst into the clearing, his eyes wild with panic, his chest heaving like he'd run the entire way. What is it? Henry's voice shifted instantly into Alpha command, all trace of the patient teacher vanishing. The council. The young wolf could barely get the words out. They're calling an emergency session. Right now. They say it's urgent. They say, he glanced nervously at Kaya. They say you have to come immediately or they'll consider it abandonment of duty. Henry's jaw clenched. Tell them I'll be there within the hour. They said now, Alpha. They were very clear. Now, or they start the vote to remove you. Silence fell over the clearing, heavy and ominous. Kaya felt Henry's fury through the bond, hot and barely contained, but beneath it was something colder. Calculation. Understanding that this was the trap finally springing closed. Go, she said quietly. You have to go. We can continue training when you get back. I don't trust this. His eyes never left the messenger. The timing is too convenient. The night before the full moon, when we're finally making progress, suddenly there's an emergency session. What choice do you have? She touched his arm gently. If you don't go, they'll remove you tonight instead of waiting to see how tomorrow plays out. And then who leads the defense when the veil breaks? He looked at her for a long moment, conflict written plainly across his face. Then he turned to the messenger. Tell them I'm coming. And tell them if this is some political game instead of a genuine emergency, they'll regret wasting my time. The young wolf nodded and disappeared back into the trees. Henry pulled Kaya close, his hand cupping the back of her head, pressing his forehead to hers. Stay here. Don't go back to the pack grounds. I don't trust what the council might do if they get you alone. I'll stay, she promised. Just hurry back. We still have hours of training before. I know. He kissed her, quick and fierce. I'll be back before dark. And tomorrow night, we'll show them exactly what a true mate bond can do. Then he was gone, shifting mid-stride, his massive black wolf form disappearing into the forest with inhuman speed. Kaya stood alone in the stone circle, the silver fire dimming around her hands, and tried to ignore the cold knot of dread forming in her stomach. Something was wrong. She couldn't name it, couldn't point to any specific thing, but every instinct she possessed was screaming danger. Not the distant, abstract danger of the corruption waiting beyond the veil. Something immediate. Something close. She should have listened to those instincts. She should have run the moment Henry left. But she didn't. Instead, she stayed in the clearing, practicing the blade formation, trying to hold it steady without his strength to anchor her. And she was so focused on the flames dancing between her fingers that she didn't hear them approaching until it was too late. The chains wrapped around her from behind, silver and blessed and burning against her skin with a cold that was somehow worse than fire. She cried out, the silver flames exploding outward instinctively, but the chains absorbed the power, drinking it in, nullifying it. Wolves emerged from the tree line. Not just any wolves. Council members. Guards. And at the center of them all, Corvin, the ancient head of the council, his scarred face twisted with something that looked horribly like satisfaction. "Forgive the deception," he said, his raspy voice carrying easily across the clearing. "But we needed the Alpha King distracted. Couldn't have him interfering with what comes next." Kaya struggled against the chains, but they held firm, burning colder with every movement. "What are you doing? Let me go." "I'm afraid we can't do that." Corvin moved closer, studying her like she was a particularly interesting specimen. "You see, we've been doing research these past few days. Reading the old texts. Learning about Pyreborn. And we discovered something fascinating." He gestured, and two wolves dragged forward a figure bound in similar chains. Leora. The old healer's face was bruised, her eyes filled with fury and fear in equal measure. "Your friend here was very helpful," Corvin continued. "Once we convinced her to talk. She told us about the prophecy. About how the Pyreborn and the Alpha King are meant to stand together against the corruption. How their combined power is the only thing that can repair the veil." "Then why are you stopping us?" Kaya's voice came out desperate, furious. "If you know what's coming, if you know we're the only chance. Because the prophecy is incomplete." Corvin's smile was cold. "Your healer friend conveniently left out the second half. The part that explains what happens if the Pyreborn's power is used differently. Not to repair the veil, but to tear it down completely. Not to stop the corruption, but to harness it." Ice flooded Kaya's veins. "What are you talking about?" "The first wolves weren't cast down for using their power to protect," he said quietly. "They were cast down for trying to break through the veil and claim the dark lands beyond. For trying to merge the worlds and rule over both. And they almost succeeded. Do you know what stopped them?" She couldn't speak. Could barely breathe. "Other Pyreborn," Corvin finished. "Ones who sided with the moon goddess. Who used their silver fire to seal the veil instead of breaking it. The war nearly destroyed everything. And in the end, the moon goddess decreed that Pyreborn were too dangerous to exist. That the power to repair is also the power to destroy, and mortals couldn't be trusted with that choice. I would never. Not willingly, perhaps." He cut her off. "But the council has come to a decision. The risk is too great. What if you fail tomorrow night? What if the corruption breaks through despite your efforts? What if the Alpha King dies and you're left with all that power and nowhere to direct your grief except toward revenge?" Understanding crashed over her, terrible and absolute. "You're going to kill me." "We're going to remove the threat," Corvin corrected. "Humanely. Quickly. Before the full moon rises and you have the chance to make the wrong choice. The territories will mourn the loss of such powerful potential, but they'll survive. They've survived for centuries without a Pyreborn. They'll survive without you. The veil is already cracking." She pulled against the chains desperately. "You saw it yourself. Whatever's trying to break through is getting stronger. Without me, without the silver fire, The territories don't have a chance. Then we'll die free, Corvin said simply. Rather than live enslaved to whatever darkness you might unleash if we're wrong about you. Henry won't let you do this. But even as she said it, she knew the truth. The emergency council session. The urgent summons. It was all designed to keep him away until it was too late. The Alpha King will be devastated, Corvin agreed. But he'll understand. Eventually. That duty sometimes requires sacrifice. That the needs of the many outweigh the desires of one. That a true leader chooses his pack's safety over his own heart. He gestured to the guards, and they began dragging Kaya toward the edge of the clearing. Toward a path she recognized with growing horror. The path that led to the Moonfall Caves. To the Veil. What are you doing? Panic flooded her voice now. Taking you to the source, Corvin said calmly. When the full moon rises tonight, the veil will be at its weakest. And we're going to use your power, all of it, channeled through those chains, to seal the cracks permanently. It will drain your life force completely, but your sacrifice will save the territories. A worthy trade, don't you think? That's not how it works. Leora's voice rang out, desperate. The prophecy says they have to work together. The bond has to be willing. If you force it, if you try to use her power without the Alpha King's strength to anchor it, you'll just feed the corruption instead of fighting it. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. Corvin's voice was cold, final. Take them both. Lock them in the caves until moonrise. And send word to the Alpha King that his mate has, regrettably, decided to flee the territory after all. That despite our best efforts to track her, she vanished into neutral lands. He'll never believe that, Kaya spat. He'll feel the bond. He'll know I'm in pain. Corvin pulled something from his robes. A small vial filled with dark liquid. This is ground moon root mixed with shadow essence. It will temporarily sever the bond's connection. Make it feel dormant, quiet, like you've moved far enough away that he can't sense you clearly anymore. By the time the effects wear off and he realizes where you truly are, it will be too late. He uncorked the vial and forced it to her lips. Kaya tried to fight, tried to turn her head away, but the guards held her immobile while Corvin poured the bitter liquid down her throat. She choked, gagged, felt it burn its way into her system. And then the bond, that warm, constant presence that had been her anchor for the past 3 days, went silent. Not broken. Not gone, but muffled, distant. Like Henry was suddenly 1,000 miles away instead of just on the other side of the territory. No, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Please no. It's better this way, Corvin said, almost gently. He won't feel your fear. Won't feel your pain. Won't know until it's over that you died saving him. Saving all of us. There's honor in that, child. Take comfort in it. They dragged her into the forest, Leora struggling futilely beside her, and all Kaya could think was that she'd been so stupid. So naive. She'd actually believed that the moon goddesses would be enough. That love and destiny would triumph over politics and fear. But the world didn't work that way. The powerful always found ways to crush those who threatened their control. And a cursed Omega with forbidden fire, no matter what the prophecy said, no matter what mark she carried, was exactly the kind of threat they would eliminate without hesitation. Henry would come looking for her eventually. Would realize the emergency session was a trap. Would feel the bond flicker back to life and race to find her. But by then it would be too late. The full moon would rise. Her power would be forcibly channeled. And she would either seal the veil and die in the process, or feed the corruption and doom them all. Either way, the prophecy would remain unfulfilled. The Alpha King and the Pyreborn would never stand together. And the territories would burn after all. The caves were colder than Kaya remembered. They'd thrown her and Leora into a natural chamber deep within the Moonfall system, far enough from the main cavern with the veil that they couldn't interfere, but close enough that when the time came, the guards could drag them to their deaths without much effort. The blessed silver chains remained locked around her wrists and ankles, burning with that unnatural cold that made her teeth ache. The bond was still muffled, still distant, but she could feel it there, buried beneath whatever poison Corvin had forced down her throat, like trying to hear someone shouting through thick walls. Henry was looking for her. She knew it with absolute certainty. Knew he'd realized the trap. Knew he was tearing through the territory trying to find her. But would he find her in time? I'm sorry. Leora's voice came from the darkness across the chamber. The old healer was chained to the opposite wall, her face pale, her breathing labored. This is my fault. I should have been more careful. Should have hidden the texts better. Should have. You couldn't have known. Kaya's voice was hoarse from screaming earlier, from begging the guards to listen, to understand what they were doing. None of them had cared. They followed the council's orders with the blind obedience of wolves who'd been taught never to question authority. Corvin would have found a way regardless. The prophecy was clear. Leora's words came out bitter, angry. It said you had to stand together. That forcing the power would only feed the corruption. But he doesn't care. He's so afraid of what you might become that he'd rather risk destroying everything than trust the moon goddess's choice. Kaya leaned her head back against the cold stone wall, feeling the silver fire stirring beneath her skin, restless, caged, furious at the chains suppressing it. The full moon would rise within the hour. She could feel it in her bones, in the way her wolf paced frantically inside her chest, in the way the air itself seemed to thicken with power. When the moon reached its apex, Corvin would come, would force her to the veil, would channel every drop of her power through the blessed chains in one desperate, suicidal attempt to seal the cracks. And it would fail. She knew it would fail. Because Leora was right, the prophecy said they had to work together, willingly, the bond acting as the conduit between alpha strength and pyreborn fire. Without Henry anchoring her, without the bond fully open and flowing, her power would just feed the corruption instead of fighting it. The territories would fall, and it would be her power that destroyed them. There has to be a way out, she muttered, pulling against the chains for what felt like the 1000th time. They held firm, drinking in the silver fire every time she tried to summon it, leaving her drained and shaking. There has to be. A sound echoed through the caves. Distant but unmistakable. Howls. Multiple wolves. And beneath it, a roar that shook the very stone around them, pure alpha fury channeled into sound. Henry. He found us, Leora breathed, hope flaring in her voice. He actually found us. The sounds grew louder. Closer. Snarls and shouts and the clash of wolves fighting. Then an explosion of power that made the chamber shake, dust raining down from the ceiling. The door to their chamber flew off its hinges. Henry stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing silver with alpha rage. Blood streaked his arms, not his own, she thought. Judging by the bodies of guards she could see slumped in the corridor behind him. He'd fought his way through every obstacle between them. And he looked absolutely feral. Kaya. Her name on his lips was relief and fury and desperation all tangled together. He crossed the chamber in 3 strides, his hands going to the chains, and she felt the bond surge back to full strength the moment he touched her. The poison's effects shattered like glass, and suddenly she could feel everything: his terror when he'd realized she was gone, his rage when he'd learned the truth, his absolute determination to reach her no matter who stood in his way. The chains, she gasped. They're blessed silver. I can't break them. Every time I try to use the fire. I know. His hands glowed with alpha power, not silver fire, but something different, the raw authority of a wolf born to lead, to command, to break through obstacles that would stop lesser wolves. He poured that power into the chains, and they began to crack. Corvin's already at the veil. He has wolves stationed there, waiting. They plan to drag you there the moment the moon rises and force the channeling whether you're willing or not. It won't work. Leora's voice cut through the chamber. Tell him, Kaya. Tell him what happens if they force it. I'll feed the corruption instead of fighting it. The words came out flat, terrible. My power will be what breaks the veil completely. What lets the darkness through? Henry's hands stilled on the chains. Then we stop them. Right now. Before the moon reaches its apex. There are dozens of them, Kaya said. Council members, guards, wolves who believe they're saving the territories by. I don't care if there are hundreds. The chains finally shattered under his power, falling away from her wrists and ankles in pieces. Kaya gasped as the silver fire roared back to life, no longer suppressed, flooding through her veins with almost painful intensity. They're not taking you. They're not using you. And they're sure as hell not going to destroy everything the moon goddess created because they're too afraid to trust her will. He moved to Leora's chains next, breaking them with the same brutal efficiency, and the old healer staggered to her feet with a grateful nod. We need to get to the main cavern, Leora said urgently, before the moon rises. If Corvin tries the channeling and it goes wrong, then we'll already be there to stop it. Henry took Kaya's hand, and she felt the bond solidify between them, stronger than ever, his strength flowing into her and her power flowing into him in a perfect circuit. Together. The way it was always meant to be. They ran. Through the twisting cave passages, past the bodies of guards Henry had torn through to reach her, their footsteps echoing off stone that had witnessed 1,000 years of secrets. The air grew colder as they approached the main cavern, thick with wrongness, and Kaya felt her wolf whimpering in instinctive fear. But she didn't slow down. They burst into the cavern just as the first rays of moonlight pierced through a natural opening in the ceiling above. The veil hung before them. Worse than Kaya remembered, the cracks had spread like infection through crystal, dark veins pulsing with sickly purple light. And pressing against those cracks from the other side were shapes. Hundreds of them. Shadow creatures with eyes that burned like coals, claws that scraped against the barrier, mouths that opened in silent screams of hunger. They were so close to breaking through. And standing before the veil, arranged in a ritual circle, were Corvin and at least 30 wolves. Council members, elite guards, wolves of power and rank who'd chosen to follow the old ways instead of trusting the prophecy. Corvin turned as they entered, his scarred face twisting with something between anger and resignation. You're too late, he said flatly. The moon is rising. The ritual has already begun. Kaya saw it then, the altar in the center of their circle, covered with ancient symbols drawn in what looked like blood. The blessed chains arranged in specific patterns. The ceremonial blade meant to spill Pyreborn blood and force the channeling. They'd been planning this for days. Maybe longer. Every step calculated, every contingency prepared for. You can't do this, Henry growled, his alpha power rolling through the cavern like thunder. I command you to stand down. All of you. Now. You have no authority here. Corvin's voice was cold, absolute. The council voted while you were searching for your mate. 3/4 majority to remove you as Alpha King for dereliction of duty. You are no longer our leader, Henry. You're just a wolf who chose personal desire over the good of the pack. The words hit like physical blows. Kaya felt Henry's shock, his fury, his disbelief through the bond. They'd actually done it. Actually removed him from power in the few hours he'd been distracted. Then you're fools, Henry spat. And you're going to get everyone killed. Perhaps. Corvin gestured, and the wolves in the circle began to move, their hands rising in synchronized motion, power building in the air between them. But we'll die free rather than enslaved to whatever darkness she might unleash. I'm not going to unleash darkness. Kaya's voice rang through the cavern. I'm trying to stop it. That's what the prophecy says. That's what the moon goddess intended. The moon goddess also intended for Pyreborn to be destroyed centuries ago. Corvin's eyes were hard, unyielding. Perhaps this time we should listen. The ritual circle flared to life, power crackling through the air, and Kaya felt it pulling at her. Not physically, but something deeper, pulling at the silver fire, trying to yank it out of her by force, trying to channel it through their ritual whether she was willing or not. She screamed as the fire erupted from her hands, but it wasn't her directing it. It was them. Using the ritual to hijack her power, to force it toward the veil, too. Henry grabbed her, his hands locking around her wrists, and suddenly his alpha strength poured through the bond like a dam breaking. The ritual's pull shattered instantly, unable to compete with the true mate connection, and the fire came back under Kaya's control. "They can't take it if we're united," he said urgently, his eyes locked on hers. "The bond is stronger than any ritual. But we need to act fast. The moon is almost at its apex, and the veil." A crack split the air like lightning. Everyone spun toward the veil as one of the larger fissures suddenly widened, spreading, dark energy pouring through like blood from a wound. The shadow creatures on the other side pressed harder, their claws finding purchase, beginning to tear their way through. "It's breaking," Leora's voice was barely a whisper. The ritual destabilized it. They tried to channel her power without her consent, and it fed the corruption instead. "Oh, moon goddess, it's actually breaking." Chaos erupted in the cavern. Some of the wolves in the ritual circle broke formation, stumbling back in horror as they realized what they'd done. Others held firm, doubling down, trying to complete the channeling despite the catastrophic failure unfolding before them. And the shadow creatures kept coming. The first one pushed through the widening crack, a thing of nightmare and hunger, its form constantly shifting between wolf and something far more terrible. It hit the cavern floor and immediately lunged for the nearest wolf, claws extended, mouth opening to reveal rows of teeth that shouldn't exist in nature. The wolf went down screaming. "Stop the ritual!" Henry roared at Corvin. "Call it off before you make it worse." But Corvin just shook his head, his face twisted with something that looked horribly like acceptance. "It's too late. The channeling's already begun. We have to finish it or nothing." Kaya's voice cut through the chaos, and she felt the silver fire surge inside her, not wild this time, not panicked, but controlled. Purposeful. "You wanted to use my power? Fine. Watch what it can actually do when I choose to wield it." She raised her hands, and the fire exploded outward. Not toward the ritual circle. Not toward the wolves who'd tried to use her as a weapon. But toward the veil itself, toward the cracks spreading like disease through the barrier between worlds. The silver flames hit the veil and spread like wildfire, racing along every fissure, filling them with moonlight, pushing back the darkness. The shadow creatures shrieked, recoiling from the holy fire, and for a moment, just a moment, it looked like it might actually work. Then the flames began to flicker. Kaya felt it through the bond. Her power wasn't enough. Not alone. She could slow the corruption, could push it back temporarily, but she couldn't seal it. Couldn't repair what centuries of decay had broken. She needed more strength. Henry's hands tightened on her wrists, and she felt his alpha power flood through the bond, amplifying her fire, making it burn hotter, brighter, stronger. "I've got you. Take what you need." She did. She pulled his strength through the bond without hesitation, without restraint, using it to anchor the flames, to give them substance and permanence. The silver fire intensified, blazing so bright that everyone in the cavern had to shield their eyes. It poured into the veil like liquid moonlight, filling every crack, sealing every fissure, burning away the corruption that had spread like infection through the barrier. The shadow creatures screamed. Those that had already pushed through burst into flames, silver and holy and absolute. Those still on the other side clawed desperately at the rapidly healing barrier, but the veil grew stronger with every second, fed by combined power that should have been impossible. Alpha King and Pyreborn, united by the moon goddess's own hand, creating something that neither could achieve alone. The last crack sealed with a sound like thunder, and the veil blazed with silver fire one final time before settling into calm, pristine clarity, whole for the first time in centuries. Silence fell over the cavern. Kaya collapsed to her knees, utterly drained, and Henry went down with her, both of them breathing hard, the bond between them pulsing with exhausted satisfaction. They'd done it. Against all odds, against the council's interference, against wolves who would rather die than trust the prophecy, they'd actually done it. Impossible, Corvin whispered, staring at the veil with something like awe on his scarred face. The prophecy was real. It was all real. Yes. Leora's voice carried through the stunned silence. It was real. The moon goddess bound them for exactly this purpose. And you almost destroyed the only chance the territories had because you were too afraid to trust in something greater than your own fear. Slowly, the wolves in the ritual circle began to drop to their knees. Not in defeat, but in something that looked horribly like shame. They'd seen it now. Seen what true mate power could accomplish. Seen that everything they'd been taught about Pyreborn being cursed was wrong. Seen that they'd almost doomed everyone through their arrogance. Henry struggled to his feet, pulling Kaya up with him, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of alpha authority. Whether the council had removed him or not, he was still the strongest wolf in the territories, and everyone present knew it. I don't care what vote you took, he said, each word precise and absolute. I don't care what political maneuvering you did while I was saving my mate. The moon goddess herself marked us, united us, gave us the power to save the territories. And if you're stupid enough to reject that, to reject her, then you don't deserve to lead. No one argued. No one moved. Tomorrow, he continued, we'll deal with the political fallout. We'll address the broken alliance with the Eastern Pack. We'll figure out how to repair the damage your fear has caused. But tonight, his arm tightened around Kaya's waist, holding her upright when she could barely stand. Tonight, you're going to acknowledge what just happened. You're going to accept that she saved you. That we saved you. And you're going to thank the moon goddess that she had better judgment than you did. Corvin was the first to bow his head. Then another wolf. Then another. Until every wolf in the cavern, even those who'd tried to force the ritual, who'd removed Henry from power, who'd been willing to sacrifice Kaya to preserve their fear-driven worldview, were bowing to the Alpha King and his Pyreborn mate, acknowledging the truth they'd tried so hard to deny. I am not your sacrifice, Kaya said quietly, but her voice carried. I'm not your weapon. I'm not your curse. I'm the mate the moon goddess chose for your alpha. And I just saved your lives. Remember that. The next time you're tempted to let fear make your decisions for you. Then she let Henry lead her from the cavern, past the bowing wolves, past the ancient altar covered in blood, past the now pristine veil that pulsed with residual silver fire. They walked out into the night, where the full moon hung overhead like a benediction, and for the first time since the mark appeared on her wrist, Kaya felt like she could finally breathe. The prophecy was fulfilled. The territories were saved. And the Alpha King's true mate was finally accepted. The days that followed were a blur of politics and healing and careful reconstruction. The Eastern Pack eventually returned to the negotiating table, not with offers of alliance through mating bonds, but with something harder won and more genuine respect. Word of what happened in the Moonfall Caves spread through the territories like wildfire. The Pyreborn who saved them all. The Alpha King who chose his true mate over political convenience. The prophecy that proved real when everyone had called it myth. Talia herself came to visit, and Kaya had braced for anger, for resentment, for the justified fury of a female whose arranged mating had been torn apart. Instead, Talia had looked at her with something that might have been relief. I didn't want him either, she'd confessed quietly, when they were alone. Not really. The alliance was my father's dream, not mine. And watching what you two can do together, she'd shaken her head. That's what a true bond looks like. What I had with Henry would have been functional at best. Miserable at worst. The moon goddess did us both a favor. The council had reversed their vote removing Henry from power. Not gracefully, Corvin and several others had to be forcibly convinced that trying to hold on to their decision would only make them look foolish, but they'd reversed it nonetheless. The Alpha King remained the Alpha King. and his pyreborn mate stood beside him, no longer hidden, no longer ashamed. The veil remained strong, whole, sealed with silver fire that would take centuries to fade. The shadow creatures on the other side had retreated, and the corruption that had been spreading through the territories began to recede like a tide going out. They'd actually done it. Saved everything. Together. But as Kaya stood on the balcony of Henry's residence 3 weeks later, watching the sun set over mountains that had witnessed everything, she found herself thinking about all the moments that had led here. All the choices. All the pain. She thought about the girl she'd been 17 and terrified, running from a pack that called her cursed, believing she was broken and dangerous and wrong. She thought about 3 years spent hiding, suppressing her power, making herself small because the world told her that was the only way to survive. She thought about kneeling in the rain, begging the moon goddess for answers, believing she was utterly alone. And she thought about the mark appearing. About Henry stepping from the shadows. About everything that had happened since, the fear and the hope and the impossible, terrifying journey from cursed Omega to acknowledged mate of the most powerful alpha in the territories. "You're thinking too loud." Henry's voice came from behind her, warm with affection, and she felt his arms wrap around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "I can feel it through the bond. All that overthinking you're doing. Just remembering," she said softly. "How different things were a month ago. How impossible all of this seemed. And now?" His lips brushed her temple, and she felt the bond pulse between them, warm, steady, permanent. "Now I'm standing here alive, with you, and the territories are safe, and I still can't quite believe it's real." She turned in his arms, looking up at him. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing me over the Alliance? Over what the Council wanted? Over. Never." The word was absolute, fierce. "Not once. Not even for a second. You're my mate, Kaya. Chosen by the moon goddess. And even if we hadn't saved the territories, even if the prophecy had been wrong, even if everything had gone differently, I still would have chosen you. Every time. In every lifetime." Tears pricked her eyes, but they weren't sad tears. They were the kind that came from finally being seen. Being chosen. Being enough exactly as she was. "I love you," she whispered. She'd said it before, but it felt important to say again. To remind him. To remind herself that this was real. "I love you too." He kissed her, slow and deep, and the silver fire flickered to life around them, gentle this time, warm, like moonlight made tangible. "My pyreborn. My salvation. My mate." They stood there as the sun finished setting and the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had witnessed the prophecy being written centuries ago, that had watched the first wolves rise and fall, that had seen every generation of wolves struggle and fight and love beneath their ancient light. And Kaya thought about all the girls like her. The ones who'd been told they were too much or not enough. The ones who'd been called cursed for gifts they didn't ask for. The ones who'd learned to make themselves small because the world demanded it. She thought about what she'd want them to know. That sometimes the things that make you different are exactly what make you necessary. That power isn't evil just because others fear it. That the moon goddess doesn't make mistakes, even when her choices seem impossible. That true mates exist. That prophecies can come true. That happy endings are possible even for those the world tried to throw away. But most importantly, that you don't need anyone's permission to be powerful. You don't need the council's approval or the pack's acceptance or anyone's validation except your own. The moon goddess marked you for a reason. And that reason is enough. "What are you thinking now?" Henry murmured against her hair. "That I spent so long running from what I am," she said quietly. "And in the end, what I am was exactly what the territories needed. What you needed. What I needed. The pyreborn." "No," she smiled, turning to face the stars, feeling the silver fire hum contentedly beneath her skin. "Just Kaya. Who happens to carry silver fire. Who happens to be mated to an alpha king. who happens to have saved the world. Just Kaya, he agreed, and she heard the smile in his voice. Who's anything but ordinary? The moon rose over the mountains, full and bright, and somewhere in the Moonfall Caves, the veil pulsed with silver fire that would protect the territories for generations to come. The corruption was beaten. The shadow creatures were contained. The prophecy was fulfilled. But the story wasn't over. Not really. Because every ending is just another beginning. Every prophecy fulfilled opens the door to new ones. And the Alpha King and his Pyreborn mate would face whatever came next together. The way it was always meant to be. Would you have chosen her? If you'd been in that grove, watching an Omega cry in the rain, would you have stepped from the shadows? Would you have trusted the moon goddess's mark, or would you have walked away because it was too complicated, too dangerous, too inconvenient? Would you have stood beside her when the council demanded she be sacrificed? When the entire pack called her cursed? When choosing her meant losing everything you'd built? Or would you have chosen duty instead? Chosen safety? Chosen the path that made sense to everyone except your heart? And if you were her, if you were the one born with power that terrified people, if you were the one told to make yourself small, if you were the one kneeling in the rain begging for answers, would you have had the courage to stop running? To embrace what you are? To stand before the veil and claim your power instead of letting others use you as a weapon? These are the questions that linger. The questions that make stories like this matter. Because at its heart, this isn't just about werewolves and prophecies and silver fire. It's about being brave enough to choose love over fear. To trust that the things that make you different might be exactly what the world needs. To stand beside someone when the whole world says you shouldn't. It's about believing that happy endings are possible, even for those who were told they didn't deserve them. Especially for them. If this story lit something inside you, if Kaya's journey resonated with the parts of you that have felt too much or not enough, if Henry's choice to fight for his mate instead of accepting what was convenient spoke to the romantic in your soul, if the silver fire and the prophecy and the impossible love story made your heart race, then you belong here. At Shayla's Romance Library. This is where we tell stories that refuse to apologize for being powerful. Stories about mates who choose each other against all odds. About females who are told they're cursed, but discover they're chosen. About love that's worth burning down the world to protect. We don't do safe here. We don't do predictable. We do stories that grab you by the heart and don't let go until the very last word. So if you want more tales like this, more Alpha Kings and forbidden power, more true mate bonds that defy politics and prophecies, more journeys from broken to powerful to absolutely unstoppable, subscribe to Shayla's Romance Library. Because here, we believe in the kind of love that saves the world. And we're just getting started. Hit that subscribe button. Join the pack. Let's burn together.